I hope I am. I hope that what I'm saying bears very little resemblance to what is happening. But I don't think I am. I mean, just looking at the 3 incidents that you just spoke about earlier, the rape of a young woman in KZN by a teenager, the report of a young woman who raped a man, and then this incident, even just looking at that, looking at the conditions in which people live, looking at the response that our society gives to questions of sexual abuse, gender-based violence, I think that we need to seriously think about what is happening. And I'm saying in this article that easy slogans, easy forms of analysis do not go far enough. I think we need to understand what is going on. And indeed, I believe that there's something bubbling beneath the surface. That is, it's partly, as I say in the article, it's partly familiar because we are dealing with patriarchal relations, but I think it's also partly new and unfamiliar. And I'm saying we need to understand that.
Deputy Minister, let me bring you in here. Your thoughts on whether or not women in society should be celebrating today as we observe 18 years of democracy.
Thank you very much, Polani. Yes. Despite the big picture, despite the challenges that we're having, women have every reason to celebrate. There's a lot to celebrate because I think as South Africans, sometimes we're too hard on ourselves. We need to celebrate the progress that we've made. We need to celebrate, if you would remember, Kolani, the first thing that women have a reason to celebrate is that they are not minors anymore. Prior to 1994, as a woman, you could not even open a bank account. You could not even own property. You could not even, that's the first thing to celebrate, is the recognition that women can own and have property, they are no longer minors. That's the first thing I think that is important for women to celebrate today, irrespective of their state of life or social status, is because there is something to celebrate. The second thing that women have the right to celebrate today is the progress that we are making. Because if you look at South Africa, we had 47% of women represented in parliament. And that has brought a bit of a significant change in terms of the way the country deals with legislation, the way the country allocates its resources, the way the country actually makes decisions. Women are able to be there and actually make some inputs on these decisions. Women have, of course, we're not doing very well, Kolani, on the boards of our respective entities. Women are only making 4% of those boards. The private sector is not doing very well because women are at 3% of CEOs. But besides that, the other aspect that brings women, it's the right to vote. There's countries even today where women are not allowed to exercise their right to choose their own government. So that is another thing that women have the right to celebrate.
If you look at this particular case, it's of great concern the way it was, the mannerism in which it was committed. The community may be feeling very angry and they may be feeling scared and wanting to protect their children, not knowing whether this person is actually safe. Every child, in terms of the Child Justice Act, needs to be exposed to an assessment and left in the care of his parents until, he's taken through a process. And if found guilty, yes, he definitely needs to be dealt with. There needs to be a proper sentencing of this person because he's 15 years old. He needs to be exposed to a rehabilitation program so that he never commits this kind of behavior again.
This is what we're dealing with in this society. Then how do we explain it?
Kolani, I think what we are looking at the moment, 18 years later, is this yawning gap between the rhetoric and the reality. So on the one hand, we have a very progressive constitution, one of the most progressive in the world, in fact. And indeed, as the Deputy Minister said, we do have many things to celebrate in terms of women's increased representation at all levels of decision-making and so on. And then you look at the levels of violence in our society in the clip that you just played, and you ask yourself, what is happening here? Why are these things not talking to each other? So I think for me, what is apparent is that we've won the easy battles. It's very easy to change laws. You can put lots of laws in. It's actually even relatively easy to get women into positions of decision-making, as we've seen with these dramatic changes in the country over the first 18 years. But that alone, unfortunately, does not change the underlying and underpinning attitudes that result in these levels of violence. We administer at GenderLinks quite regularly an attitude survey, and the results are quite interesting because they show that when you ask the basic question, are women and men equal? And when you ask it of women and men, everyone says, of course, they're equal. But then you go on to ask a range of other questions that have to do with women's agency, and then you begin to see this big divergence between the views of women and men. And what that tells us is that we've won the battle, but we haven't won the war.
Mbuyiselo, can you explain why there are these hardening and really cruel attitudes, particularly by men?
I think, Xolani, and to your listeners, it's about this entitlement. Xolani, it's about a sense of impunity. You see, Xolani, we rape because we can rape. And we know that how things are investigated, the possibility, Xolani, that it may collapse. And the cases we're talking about, Xolani, that are reported, it's a tip of an iceberg. But the reality is that most women do not report rape for the simple reason that they know, or for fear that I will not be taken serious because this case will not go anywhere. And Xolani, you see, the difficulty is that in our country, we close the stable when the horse has bolted every time without fail. It's give me 2 weeks. I will call you on a private line. After 2 weeks, it will be business as usual. You will not see Minister Mthethwa in Bramfesheville, or you will not see these photo opportunities where ministers and everybody else goes to lend their support, because these are extremely wonderful opportunistic moments. But then the rape continues, Xolani, unabated, because, Xolani, there is this sense, a deep sense from most of us as men that, I can, because I can get away with it, literally get away with it. And Xolani, the sad thing is that the ministry of women, children and persons with disabilities, it's the least supported. Now you ask yourself, if indeed there is commitment, why don't you then put your money where your mouth is? That's my problem.
Especially if, as Colin says, the easy battles have been won,
absolutely,
the difficult ones need to be dealt with, and they perhaps reside in this ministry.
Colin, it's this ticker box. We go to international conferences, but hang on, we've established this ministry, we've passed this law, you've got the Sexual Offences Act, you've got the Domestic Violence Act. But for me, the challenge is when the rubber hits the tarmac. That's for me the challenge.
But can we make sense of what is going on and how we get ourselves out of it?
I think we can. Firstly, I believe very strongly that even in this conversation, we don't go deep enough to the places that are uncomfortable. And if we don't do that, if we don't try to really wrestle with what is happening in our society, 30 years from now, we're going to be dealing with the same problem, and even more so. None of us dismiss or make liquor of the gains that we've made in the last 18 years. None of us take these freedoms for granted. But I think that most critically, we also have to realize that the stories that we're hearing every day are making that freedom meaningless for many, many South African people. Now, how do we make sense of this? What do we do? Firstly, I think Colin has spoken about we've won the battle, we've not the war.
Deputy Minister.
It becomes very painful, like your last email that you read. And people assume that we're just sitting and doing nothing. Or when it's said that politicians come to people when they have problems. I think the whole us and them kind of an attitude is not assisting anybody. And the assumption that there's nothing that we are doing and that the ministry is toothless and whatever else that is saying is also not true. I think I need to just talk to that this ministry was never established to implement any program. And I think that's important for us to actually understand. This ministry was established to consolidate and coordinate government's programs, which is where the gap is. because justice is doing their own thing there, social development is doing their own thing there, health is doing, and we were brought in to pull them all together so that we can get the minimum impact on the program.
But Deputy Minister, perhaps these criticisms are aimed at highlighting what people see as a crisis of leadership. They are saying to politicians and the department and the ministry that we don't see you, we would like to see more of you. Take leadership, take charge.
But we are in charge, Xolani. You must also understand that the media, and I can tell you as a fact, the work that we do in the department doesn't make news. The fact that people don't see us on the newspapers and don't hear about us on the radio unless if you've united us like today, and today we're discussing a specific work, not the work that we do. The sectors that we represent don't make news. And I think that is what South Africans must come to realize. For an example, let me come back and not mix the issues. Let me talk about the Gender-Based Violence Council. I'll talk about the ministry some other time. The establishment of the Gender-Based Violence Council, as said, it's a structure that we are saying as a ministry, maybe when we can come together. If you listened to Rafik, he talked about issues of culture and the understanding. Faisal talked about religion. We're trying to bring everybody around the table. The same way that the same strategy when we established the South African National AIDS Council. That said, let's come together and see how can we attack this monster together. That's what we are doing with the Gender-Based Violence Council. We're trying to bring all stakeholders, Xolani, so that there is no us and them. It won't be bureaucratic. It's a multi-intersectoral structure. Will be the secretariat, but each and every sector across the whole spectrum will be represented, and we will put together our ideas, and we will then say together, not in our name, as it said, how do we ensure that men takes